Well, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Or afternoon, I suppose. It's morning right now as I'm filming this. Hey, today we're talking about real estate. Real estate. So there's, what the heck is real estate? It's land. Could just be land with just dirt, you know. Could be farmland. But for the most part, we're talking about homes, condominiums, real estate, houses. So we'll talk a little about ownership, investing, a little bit about taxes, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, let's get some basic terminology out of the way. So we're going to use this. You'll need to know these terms. So if we were in class, I'd have you draw a picture of your house. I'm not going to have you draw that right now. I'd ask you how much it costs you. I'd ask you how much you think it might be worth in 5 years. And that's to show kind of the idea of appreciation, that the values usually historically have climbed, have gone up. All right, but the first term you're going to want to know is equity. What is equity? It's a really actually important term to know, and it's going to be a little different than capital gain, which I'll give you in a second here. But equity is it's well, the way I define it in terms of math is a math equation. Is you take the value of your house minus what you still owe on any kind of a mortgage, any kind of the home loan. All right. So if my house is worth $500,000 and I still owe, $200,000 on the loan, then I've got $300,000 in equity. So what does that mean? What does that do for me? Well, it gives you an idea if you were to sell your house, how much money you can get out of it, right? If I've got a $500,000 house, I don't necessarily get $500,000 if I sell it, because I've got to pay back the bank, assuming I've borrowed money, which usually we do. Sometimes people pay cash. I've never paid cash for a house. That would be a nice. There's actually reasons maybe not to pay cash, but if anyway. So equity is the idea of how much you could, how much money you get out of it if you were to sell it. It also gives the bank, if you wanted to borrow more money. If you say that, once again, you had your $500,000 house, you owe $200,000 loan, you have $300,000 in equity, banks will lend you money on that. So you have access to that equity from borrowing more money. You can either what's called refinance your loan, which right now is a fantastic time to refinance because interest rates are literally at the lowest levels they've ever been in history, I believe, or really close to it. And you can, so if you've got a loan that you say right now you owe 5% on, you can get that, you can refinance that loan. So they made that $200,000 loan, is you owe a 5% interest rate. Well, now interest rates you can get for less than 3%. We'll even call it 3% interest rate. You could save 2%, which maybe doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you're talking about a couple $100,000, you're looking at a few $100s a month. So a couple $100s a month, and which is, a few $1,000s a year over the course of a lot of years. And most loans are 15 years or 30-year loans. You're looking at potentially, a lot of money, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars even, if with a refi. And you can even refi and get cash out. So if you had a $200,000 loan, you could maybe say, hey, I want a $250,000 loan when I refinance. They pay off the old loan of $200,000, and then you get to keep $50,000. You could use $50,000 for whatever you want to use it for. I've done that before. I've not $50,000 of it. I've gotten like $30,000 extra when I refinance, and they just give you $30,000. Now I got $30,000. I wound up buying my boat with that $30,000. That was my boat money. But I wouldn't have the boat. I might have had it another way, but I had a loan payment. I had no payment on my boat because I paid cash for it because I took money out of the equity of my house. So equity, there you go. It's the value of my $500,000 house minus my $200,000 loan. I get equity. I get whatever that was, $300,000 in equity. It's different, go back, than your capital gain. So we've already defined capital gain when we talk about stocks. And so capital gain is the same thing with the real estate. Capital gain is whatever you sold your house for minus whatever you paid for it. So if my house is worth, say I sell that house for $500,000, and originally I paid $300,000, my capital gain would be the $200,000. It's a little more technical than that. You got to take out realtor costs and any kind of other expenses, and there's some other things that could complicate this, but basically this is what your capital gain is. Whatever you sold it for, really the money you get out of the sale minus what you originally paid for it. All right, capital gains. We'll get to that a little bit later. There you go. So let's try a little math here. You should be having a worksheet out, and you should be doing this as we go. But so let's say in the year 2000, man, I need to update these years. You bought a house for $200,000. You guys weren't even born yet. With a 20% down payment. Okay, so that's another thing to look at. We haven't talked about. Usually, when you buy a house, when you buy real estate, most people are gonna borrow money. They're gonna get a loan. We call it a mortgage loan, MORTGAGE, a mortgage loan, and then the bank is going to want a down payment. Okay, they're going to want to know that you've got so-called some skin in the game, that you've got a reason to keep this house nice, to pay your bills, things like that, because eventually you could lose that 20% down. You can lose your down payment if the house value declines, and you're going to lose your down payment before the loan. Like the bank is going to have like an interest in the house. So anyway, okay. So, and let's say in the year 2004, so 4 years go by, and the house is now worth $350, and you've now paid off. Your loan balance is now at $150. Okay, loan balance is now at $150,000. So the question is, what is your equity? What's the equity? Maybe pause this video and write it down. Okay, so the equity is this. You paid $350,000, or sorry, you have your house is worth $350. You owe $150. All this other stuff doesn't matter at this point, and your equity is $200,000. Okay, equity. Let's say you sell it for 2000 or in 2005 for $440. And by the way, this is what the housing market was doing back in the early 2000s. It was going up this drastically. It was really kind of nutty. This isn't exact my situation, but I bought it. My situation was similar to this in terms of buying and selling back in this time period. Okay, let's say you sold it for $440. 2005. Next question is, what's your capital gain? What is your capital gain? Pause it, write it down, let's see if you got it right. Okay, here we go. Capital gain, $240. Remember, capital gain formula is what'd you sell it for minus what'd you pay for it. Sales price $440. You originally paid $200. You have a $240,000 gain. Okay. Now notice you're going to get more than $240 when you sell it. If you sold a year later, you sold it for $440. Your loan is somewhere less than $150 because you've had another year of paying off your loan. But we can even call it $150 if you want. So you owe $150, maybe it's $146 at this point, it's something like that. But so you're going to get $440 minus, you're going to pay the bank back, and then you get to kind of keep the rest. I mean, once again, there's probably some closing costs. You got to pay the escrow title company maybe, and you might have repairs you got to do on the house before you sell it. You're going to owe your realtor a portion of that money, usually 4 to 6% of that sale. And so that's just something to kind of be aware of. I wonder if you see that Amazon has shipped thing pop up on the screen. All right. So anyway, capital gain and equity. Two really important terms to know, kind of know how they work. All right. What are advantages of ownership? Why should eventually someone own a house? What are the good, what's the good part about owning real estate? First of all, there are some tax benefits. We talked about taxes before. Taxes matter. Okay. Your interest that you pay on that mortgage is tax deductible. Okay. They've modified this a little bit with the last tax tax law change back in 2018. But still, it's tax deductible. There's some limits now on how much you can deduct. But you can deduct. So like for me personally, my biggest tax deduction, the biggest way I save money on my personal income taxes is because I can write off the interest on my mortgage. Actually, on mortgages, on multiple mortgages, every mortgage that you own, you can write the interest off. And the interest is significant on these mortgages. We'll go run through it, but you'll find out that you actually, if I've got a $2,000 a month house payment, let's say that's my mortgage payment. At the beginning, probably 1,500 of that is interest, and only 500 or 600 of that is paying off the loan itself, paying down the principal of the loan. So you pay the bank a bunch early. It depends on what your interest rate is, and it depends on how long the mortgage loan is, and if it's a 15-year, 20 or 30-year loan. But you will pay a lot in interest and less in principal. So that's significant. So that if I'm in the 30% tax bracket and I pay $15,000 on the year in interest, I don't have to pay tax on that $15,000. Pay my income tax. So it saves me whatever that is, $4,500 in income taxes. Whereas if you're a renter, there's no tax savings. You get zero tax savings. So if I'm paying my mortgage for $2,000, by the way, property taxes are also deductible. So your property taxes on your home are basically 1% of the assessed value of your house. And so if you bought your house for $500,000, that first year anyway, your assessed value is $500,000. So 1% of that is $5,000. So you'd owe $5,000 in property taxes that year. You'd actually owe a teeny bit more because we've had some add-ons to our property taxes. Actually, most of the add-ons are related to our school district. They're school bonds. And so the homeowners around here pay the bonds back. There's a bond from 1997 that is still on my property taxes. Most of those bonds are 30-year bonds, so they're going to be on there for a while. Okay, so the remodeling, the new track, the new stadium, and what's going on at the school, that is all paid for by bonds. Bonds come out of our property taxes. But a decent little estimate is 1% of the value of your house, the assessed value. And so those are deductible. So between the interest and property taxes, like my payment every month is basically $2,700 a month for interest, the principal of the loan, property taxes, and insurance on my house. And the interest and property taxes are all tax deductible. So of that $2,700, almost $2,000 a month of that I can deduct from my income. So I don't pay income taxes on it. So if I'm in, once again, 30% bracket, and that's $2,000 a month, that means I save $600 in income taxes. And if I had a mortgage, if I had a rent of $2,500 a month, $2,700 a month, I'd get no tax savings. There would be zero. Renters paid get no benefits in terms of your income taxes. So that's a fairly big deal. It's a fairly big deal. You get a little pride of ownership, a little pride. In other words, you feel good about it. It's nice to own a house. There's stress with it. But when I've rented, I haven't felt as attached to my house. I've known it's a temporary gig. I'm going to live there for a year or two or 5 even. But I don't own it. I don't have any great reason to make it awesome, other than I want to live in a decent place. But there's something to be said. And if you live in a neighborhood with lots of rental units, often that neighborhood is a little more run down because the tenants don't have a great reason to really do a lot to maintain it, and landlords frankly don't. I've got a rental property, and I don't spend a lot of time wanting to fix that up because it's money that doesn't benefit me a whole lot. Not that I want to be a slumlord, because I'm not that either. I'll fix what I need to be fixed, but I'm not going to remodel the interior of the kitchen. My property manager, hey, you should remodel your kitchen. You can get an extra $100 a month. I'm all, what's the remodel going to cost me? Oh, probably $20,000. Okay, so $100 a month. I'll get that back in 20 years. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. Sorry. All right. Potentially of capital gains, right? You buy low, sell high. Real estate could be a great investment. Every home I bought has gone up in value, and I've made money. Now, there's no proof, there's no guarantee of that. Like the stock market, it can go down, but the difference is people need to live in a home. People are always going to need homes, and so real estate historically, with the exception of like 2008 when real estate prices kind of crashed, but they've generally risen. These stayed even or risen. So it's a fairly fairly safe investment, much less risk than the stock market. Okay, here's another trick. Ready? If this is a little tricky, you're gonna want to make sure you know this because I usually ask a question about it on like a test or a quiz. If your home is your primary residence, that's where you lived for at least, it should say at least 2 of the past 5 years. Then when you sell the house, you don't owe any capital gains tax on the first $250,000 of gain. And if you're married and live there together, you both get $250,000. So the first $500,000 of capital gain, you don't owe any tax on. Right? If this was the stock market, and you, especially if say it was a short-term gain, or if you remember short-term versus long-term gains in the stock market. If it's a short-term gain, you pay your income tax rate on short-term gains. So if you made, let's say you're lucky enough to make, $500,000 in gain in the stock market. Well, if it was all short-term, you'd be in like the 37% tax bracket. You'd owe 37% on that $500,000, which is whatever that is, 37, 40, $175,000 or so. You'd only get to keep $325 of that gain because you would owe a tax, capital gains tax, right? But if it's where you live, and it says for at least 2 of the past 5, which means you could have lived there, 4 and 5 years ago and then rented it. This is what some people do. They'll move out of that house, they'll rent it for at least 3 years, and then they sell it. And then because they lived there, years 1 and 2, and then rented it years 3 and 4 and 5, they don't owe tax on that capital gain. So I've known people that have done that. They've kind of upgraded. They'll live in a house 2 years, move out, not sell it, move out, buy another house, rent their house out, and before 3 years comes up, then they sell it, and they don't pay any capital gains tax. And by the way, you could move out. You say, well, how do you buy the second house if you don't sell your first house? Well, you could refinance your loan. You could take money out of the original house. Let's say you've got $200,000 in equity. You could take $100,000 out of that, buy a refinance of the loan, and then use that 100 as the down payment on the next house. And so really, you never had to come up with that $100,000 on your own. You just let the value of your house go up and then took that and basically transferred it to the second house you're going to buy. And you could do that again, right? You've lived in that second house now for at least 2 years, and you can turn around and rent that and sell it and move up, and you kind of keep moving on up. Okay, so no capital gains tax is really a significant thing. So you get tax benefits while you're living there, paying your interest on your mortgage and all that. And then when you sell it, if you live there, you don't pay capital gains tax. Now, if you've rented it for the past 5 to 10 years, then it's now become an official investment property, and now you owe capital gains or tax on the capital gains. That's my pride of ownership. Woo! Okay. All right. What else we got? I've already mentioned this already, but you can borrow from the equity, right? You can borrow. So you can refinance that loan. There's 2 ways. I'm going to give you 2. You can come up with what's called a HELOC, which is a home equity line of credit. And if you can use that to remodel your house, you can. So we've talked about, credit cards last week, right? So a home equity line of credit is another form of credit, but now it's a secured line of credit. It's secured to the value to your house. It becomes what's called a second loan. You might have heard a second. I don't know. So your first loan is your mortgage, your primary mortgage that you bought the house with. But let's say you've got that $500,000 house. You owe $200,000 in the loan. You have $300,000 in equity. You can go to the bank and you say, hey, bank, hey, Bank of America, hey, Wells Fargo. I've got $300,000 in equity. I'd like access to it. And they say, oh, we'll loan you some money on that. And so they'll set up a line of credit, and then you can borrow from that line whenever you want. So I have a line of credit on my house. I've got a HELOC. It's a $100,000 line of credit, and I can access that $100,000 like right now. In the next 3 minutes, I could get on my bank account, and I could transfer money over to my checking and pay for whatever I got to pay for. So I use it as a cushion. I also use it when big items have to come up. So I bought cars with it, and it's a cheap line of credit. It's like 3% interest rate, and you pay the interest, or the interest that you pay on that is like interest on your home mortgage. So it's deductible. So whereas my credit card has an interest rate of say 17, 18%, and there's no tax deductions, my HELOC, my credit line, it's a really cheap rate, say 3% today, 3.5, something like that. But that interest that I pay on that is tax deductible. And I can pay off a lot, pay off a little every month. There's a minimum you got to pay every month. I try and pay more than that because it'll take me forever otherwise to pay it off. But if something large comes up, I've got this as a backup. I still have to make payments on whatever I borrow from it. And then whatever I don't use, like I think right now I owe $20,000 on that line of credit. So I've got $80,000 available. $80,000, there's no interest on that. I haven't used it yet. But I could use it. I've got access to it if I need access to it. I could use that and put a down payment. I've used my equity line before and put as a down payment on a rental unit. So I bought a second rental property and I used my equity line as my down payment. So I didn't have to save $20,000 to put a down payment down. I use this equity line. So owning that house, owning real estate, man, it gives you access to money that you otherwise wouldn't have. That once again, you can't do that with stocks. You can't do that. Okay. So you can have the equity line option, or as I mentioned before, you can refinance your home or mortgage, and you can just refinance for a larger amount. So if I owe $200,000, I can refinance that for, like I said before, I think $250,000. So they take, hey, I've got a loan with 4% interest rate. I owe $200,000. I go to the bank. I say, I see rates are down to 3%. I'd like to refinance that. I'd like some cash out. And say, okay. And they say so we'll give you, how much money do you want? How much cash you want? It looks like you got $300,000 in equity. How much you want to refinance for? Let's refinance it for $300,000. Your old one was $200,000. So I get a new loan for $300,000. With that loan, they pay off the $200,000 loan. That loan's gone. That's paid off, replaced by a $300,000 loan. And then the extra $100,000, they say, hey, here you go. There's $100,000. Now I've got $100,000. I've got a larger payment probably because I now borrowed more money. I now owe more against the house. If I were to sell the house, I'm going to get $100,000 less than I would otherwise because I now owe that extra $100,000. But I get the $100,000 today instead of having to wait until I sell the house. So that's another way to be able to get cash, be able to get money out. I've never done that unless I really had a need. When I bought the boat, with the time I did that, we thought we were going to remodel our kitchen. We thought we were going to spend $20,000-$25,000 on a kitchen remodel. 2 years went by, we never did that. There was money in a bank account. I'd set aside money, and I convinced my wife, hey, let's just buy the boat because I know we're going to use the boat, and we may not remodel the kitchen anytime soon. Okay. And as we said, interest on these are also tax deductible. So you get access to cash, and then you save income taxes. Okay. The other deal is you got to live in it. Okay. So if you buy the house, you live in it. It's an expense to pay the monthly payment, but I would argue either way, you've got to pay money to live somewhere. You're going to pay rent. So the question is, rather pay rent to somebody else so they own the house, or would you rather pay a mortgage payment, get the tax benefits of the mortgage, of the interest, get the potential gain benefit, and still live there? Like, where else can you can't live in your stock market. You can't live in bonds. You can't live in your savings accounts. You get to live in an investment. Okay. The next part is, if you live in it? what if you want to invest? Well, there's really two ways to make money if you invest. One is you can buy it and flip it. So you might have seen some like HGTV shows, Flip That House, or I don't know. There's I forget the names of them now, but there's been several. So buy it, fix it up a little, spruce it up, give a paint job, maybe remodel something, and then sell it. All right, buy the house for $300,000, put $30,000 of work into it and make it pretty. Sell it later for $370,000, hopefully, and make $23,000. I've never done that. I've never been a flipper, but people do it. It's just, to me, a little more risk and a lot more work. You can just buy it as a rental unit. Now, I have done this, and it becomes so-called income property, and you get income, monthly income. So my rent it's in my house in North Carolina. Why North Carolina? Long story. But anyway, it's in North Carolina. I've got a property manager that manages it. I do very little with it. I just get emails about my rent is in, or they need to fix something. That's the problem with a rental unit. Things need to be fixed on occasion. There was a leak behind the shower. They had to take off all the tile and replace it, and it cost $1,200, and I had to pay that a couple months ago. So things come up. But if all goes well, I get about $1,100 or $1,200 a month in rent. My mortgage payment on it is $600. I got a property manager payment of $100. That's about it. So there's like $700. My rent's about $1,000 or $1,200. I bring in $400 to $500 in extra income of like profit, and I use that to help pay the equity line down. I put in a little rental account. Because often, once again, something comes up where I have to pay $1,000 or $1,500, and so I just kind of recycle that money. I don't really use any of that money for my own living. I consider that its own little entity, and so you can buy it and rent it. I've owned that property since 2004, so 16 years now. I had a second one. I sold that a year ago, so I had two at one point. All right, so rental properties. On the downside, so what's the problem? The real estate sounds so great. Well, there's risk, right? I've got one of my biggest worries as a landlord is liability risk, that someone can get hurt and maybe sue me. And so I've got insurance for that, but still, I'm personally potentially at risk. You've got repairs and remodel, right? If you rent your house and something goes wrong, you can call the landlord. Hey, there's mold behind the shower. Got to fix it. And so I don't have a year in my house. I don't have a landlord to call. Things need to get repaired. I need to repair it or fix it or live with it. Any kind of remodeling, I've got to pay for. So there's expense that comes with real estate. Unlike stocks, right? Stocks, you buy your shares of Tesla and you let Tesla just go. And there's no expense. There's no real decision making other than, do I buy or do I sell? Okay. Homes can lose value. We certainly saw this in 2007, 2008, 2009. But man, since then they've gone up. And actually this year, oddly enough, in a pandemic, prices have gone up, particularly here on the Central Coast. I think they're up like 15% from a year ago, which is pretty great. It could be less, right? If it loses value and it's less than what you owe, that's what's called being upside down or underwater. So what's being upside down? It means, I owe $400,000 on my house. Let's say I paid $500. I owe $400 on my loan, and then the house deteriorates in value. The market goes down, and now it's only worth $350, but I still owe $400. Bam! I'm upside down. I'm negative $50,000. So in that case, what happens is there would be a short sale, and so if I had to sell and it was worth $350 and I owed $400, I'm short. So the bank has to accept that. They got to decide if they're going to accept it, to accept that low price. So when you sell in that situation, you're not the final decision maker on if you'll accept it. The bank has to go, yeah, I'm going to eat that $50,000. So that's not good. Or if you don't make your payments, they get foreclosed on, or foreclosure, which means, hey, you're not making your payments And I know people, by the way, that their house is upside down, and so they stop making payments. Now, why am I making payments on a house that's only worth $350 if I owe $400? And they just stopped, and then they got kicked out. They got foreclosed on. But it took like 6 months to 12 months for the foreclosure to happen. So they lived in the house for, I think, up to a year rent-free or mortgage-free because they just didn't pay it. Of course, it crushed their credit score. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. But anyway, they did that. Okay, there's an upside-down house right there. Look at that puppy. Upside down. Look at people walking in. Anyway. All right. Last thing I'm going to cover. We've actually gone over this before, but return on investment. We are getting close to our probably being too long here. But what's a return on investment? Return on investment is this simple formula. There's a lot of ways to do this. It's how much should you make divided by how much should you invest. Okay? Times 100%. That's your ROI, return on investment. Now, here's the trick on real estate. With stocks, it's pretty easy. What you made is your capital gain, by the way. How much you made is your capital gain. How much you invested, however, in stocks is whatever you paid for the stocks, right? But in real estate, it's not the price of the house, it's your down payment, right? So in other words, if I buy that house for $500,000 and I put a $100,000 down payment down and I borrow $400,000, well, I didn't really spend $500,000. I only spent $100,000. I took $100,000 of my own money from somewhere and put it down. The bank spent the other $400,000. So I don't consider the amount made, the amount that I invested to be that money I borrowed for the bank. It's your down payment. That's what you're investing. That's what you're taking. Okay? So it's capital gain divided by your down payment times 100% is really your ROI. These are both the same thing, but you need to know that amount invested in this case is your down payment. Okay, so for example, if you bought a house for $100,000, here's a little math for you, and you put 20% down, and that means you borrowed 80, what is your ROI? If you say you sold it for 140, what is your return on your investment? Okay. The amount made or the capital gain is once again, your sales price minus what you paid for the house. Sometimes I'll call it your new price minus your old price. Your original price, your sales price minus your original price. But anyway, it's your capital gain divided by your down payment. So how do we do that? Try the math. Try the math before you see it. Maybe pause. Okay. Your return on investment is the answer. Oh, is it hiding down there? Is that you made $40,000, right? You sold it for $140. You paid $100. There's $40,000 gain, and you put down $20,000 because $20,000 is 20% of 100, and so 40 over 20 is 2, right? So it's a 200% gain, a 200% return on your investment. So once again, let's see if this was. What if this was stocks? What if this is $1,000 stock and you sold that stock for $1,400? Let's kind of move these numbers down. Well, if this was stocks, you had $1,000, sold it for $1,400 or whatever, $100 stock, sold it for $140. It's even easier. Well, your gain would be 40, but your investment's 100, so it would have been 40 over 100, which is 0.4 times 100. That's a 40% gain. Notice that same percentage increase in price. It's a 40% increase in price, but that 40% increase in price, because of your original price, you only paid 20% of it, gives you a 200% percentage gain return. So if you go back to our stock market game, man, if you made 200%, that is just fantastic. On average, it's going to take almost 20 years of the stock market to make 200% gain. Whereas in real estate, you could make something similar to that in a couple of years, a few years often. Depends on where you're at, location. But anyway, that is return on investment. And I think that's the end of your notes. All right, I've got some more samples here I was going to go through with you. I'm not going to go through. We're short on time. It's been a little while. I appreciate your attention. Please come to me with any questions on this. And that is that. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. Have a good one.